I'm Seulghee Lee. I'm class of 2007 at Williams. I did my postdoc in the English department at Williams, so I was on the faculty from 2014 to 2016. And then I am an assistant professor of African American Studies and English Literature at the University of South Carolina, and I'm in my 4th year at this position.
Could you describe briefly 3 things that sort of brought you to Williams, sort of in the middle of the mountains in Massachusetts?
Yeah, 3 things. Oh, that's cool. I had a cousin who had gone to Williams. So the extended family that were in the States are very scattershot all over the country. And my cousin's class of 94. So I had known about Williams since I was basically in middle school. I went to a relatively large high school in Chapel Hill. And so I knew I wanted a relatively small, intimate liberal arts college experience. And Williams, was at that time had just, it was at the top of everybody's list as it has remained since. And so it was, it made sense for me for those reasons.
You mentioned that you also worked at Williams for a little bit, right? And so what was that like, sort of being a student at Williams and working at the college as well?
Professionally, it was very great. It was extremely satisfying. I got to work with a very wide array of students, folks who are, involved with the campus affinity groups that I have been involved with, and folks from other sectors of campus. My classes were really, stimulating and interesting. The English department historically has had its struggles appealing to a wider array of students. And so being a young alum, being a person of color, and then being a scholar and teacher of minoritized literatures and my specializations in contemporary African American literature, it was kind of it was easy to kind of find my people in terms of the students. And so that was really rewarding for me.
What got you interested in the line of work in your department now?
Growing up in North Carolina got me into studying Black culture. And then my classroom experience as a student at Williams really propelled me to think about a whole bunch of very entangled, complicated conceptual questions regarding race and gender and sexuality, and also regarding certain historical periods in American literature in general. And so what I tell people is that, I got a sense of what's known as the Black radical tradition from my time at Williams, specifically through my undergraduate mentor. And that kind of interest and building momentum from that interest in the classroom took me to graduate school.
Is there any intersection that you think is particularly insightful between the work that you're doing now and what's happening in the world around the virus?
Yeah, absolutely. We've had 2 cognate racial reckonings as a nation in this during this pandemic. First, the spike in anti-Asian racism and anti-Asian violence as related to some bad leadership from on top and the racist rhetoric that's been going around. And then we also have the racial reckoning related to the George Floyd uprisings and the murders of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and George Floyd. And so there's a lot to say about what are the possible reforms and remedies to unmitigated anti-Black violence. And my hope is that folks are, the kind of rise in anti-racist consciousness in this country through this summer lasts and goes into and spills over into the post-pandemic times as well.
What's great about these interviews is that we get to ask like sort of more professional academic questions, which are always very interesting, then also some personal ones just to add some, sort of humanistic texture to your profile. So if Williams was an ice cream flavor, which one do you think it would be?
Yeah, it's tricky. I don't know, maybe like some kind of like vanilla chip. It's historically and culturally very white codified. When I was a student there, it still felt like a very provincial and regionally specific clientele. Juan and I, our class, we definitely had our community of students of color, Black students, Latinx students, Asian American students, and yet the prevailing culture felt very foreign to most of us. And so that's why I kind of like the vanilla chip image might fit that.
Is there a current or sort of recent research topic that you're working on that's really exciting? And if there is one, could you explain it like you would explain it to a 5-year-old?
Sure. Yeah. I'm not sure about how efficacious my explanation will be, but this kind of, actually I have it right here. I've been writing on it for the last couple of weeks. Frank Wilderson's Afropessimism came out earlier this year in March, and it's a culminating text of the kind of most interesting and powerful set of ideas in Black studies of the last 15 to 20 years. And it's really crucial to think about its central insights in light of the racial reckonings that we just mentioned. And so Afropessimism contends that the ontology that we live as human beings in the modern world is totally constituted by anti-Black violence. And so reality itself, as we conceive of it, is founded upon the simultaneous elimination and also the fungibility, but also the accumulation of Black death and violence. And so one of the things that Professor Frank Wilderson will say is that the reason that the spectacle of George Floyd's murder can continue to happen is because that kind of spectacle, whether you're talking about the spectacle of slavery, whether you're talking about Jim Crow and the eras of lynching after Reconstruction, and all the way to the present day, that the ongoing psychic health and the ongoing sustenance of our political reality is dependent upon the spectacle of Black suffering and death. And so the reason that it's called Afropessimism is that while it diagnoses that, it doesn't actually provide an answer or a solution for how that violence ought to be addressed.
So essentially, it's arguing that all of the noise around, like when something like George Floyd happens, then that is not necessarily productive. It's performative in a way.
Yeah, exactly. And it raises questions about if we're living out a history that's totally dependent upon that gratuitous violence against Black folks, it means that there aren't any easy solutions, such as voting, right? Such as police reform. And so one of the taglines for Afropessimism, what Professor Wilderson will say is, I'm not against police brutality, I'm against police, right? So we see some of these ideas kind of coming into the public discourse when we talk about defunding the police, when we talk about abolishing the police, abolishing prisons. So there are radical political manifestations of this set of ideas, but it won't occur within the given political parameters in which we see the spectacle of George Floyd's death. So George Floyd's death is not exceptional, right? That's a fundamental axiom of this theory. And then the other axiom to this theory, the thing that I'm trying to work on and contribute my voice to, is that if you, according to Afropessimism, there isn't space for other people of color, and there isn't space for anti-racist white folks to join in a kind of multiracial coalition regarding anti-racism, because that anti-Black violence and suffering is so constitutive of everything else. So the theory holds that there actually can't be an anti-Brown or anti-Asian suffering in the United States or in the modern context that is in any way analogous to the severity and the gratuity of anti-Black violence.
Given that, what is a more pragmatic way of going about I don't want to say solving racism, but maybe ameliorating it in some way?
Yeah, I don't have an easy answer for that. I'll say the tougher parts first. I'm not moved by much of the liberal discourse from this past summer regarding, anti-racist reading lists and those kinds of conversations.
Post the black square and all of that.
Yeah. So like you were saying, there's a performative element to all of that I think, most reasonable people can agree will just uphold and recycle the status quo. And on the other hand, we're living in this era where old school scientific racism is back in full force. People, occupants of, the current administration are talking that way and building policy fed by those ideas. So it seems ever more crucial to just have a general historical consciousness around how these ideas developed and where we stand in relation to them as a society at large. But I don't I don't hold much hope for forms of redress and reform at this moment.
Moving back to sort of more, personal, interesting questions too. Is there any new hobby that you've developed since quarantine that you'd like to share?
Let me think. What have I been doing? I've been guilty of doom scrolling.
What is that?
Just that thing that everybody's doing where you just read the worst of everything online and you can't stop scrolling the news app.
Oh, okay.
So I can't say I've done much. I've been holed up working on my book and trying to keep track of my folks, my people. So that's been occupying much of my time.
Yeah. And something that I think will be really helpful for people to know is, you're a Williams alum that's gone into academia. You've been at Williams, you've been outside of Williams. Like, do you have any advice for younger Williams folks trying to get into academia now?
I think talk to as many people as you can. The variety of academic experiences represented on the Williams faculty can be very helpful. I think it's not an accident, nor is it surprising that so many Williams alums go into academia, given the quality of the educational experience there. And every time I go into a classroom, every time I start a new semester, I am haunted by those kind of epiphanic experiences and conversations that I had while I was a student there. So those are invaluable. On the other hand, I would say that given the strictures of academia and given all that's going on in higher ed in general, it's very important to remain vigilant about the prospects of procuring an academic career at this point. And this is especially true because when you're interfacing as a Williams student with Williams faculty, you're seeing a very tiny elite portion of what higher ed looks like in the United States in general. And that's a huge privilege, but it can also feel like you're putting blinders on to the rest of how the professoriate looks in the rest of the country. And so that's really important to keep in mind as you consider the prospects of whether you think further study would be worthwhile or not.
I'm sure that'll be very helpful. What is the first thing you plan on doing once things get back to the proverbial normal?
That's a cool question. There's a bunch of things. I have an infant niece that I haven't gotten to see very much, and so I'll have a visit there. And then my partner's family is in Southern California, and we didn't get to do our annual summer travel there, so we'll get to go see them out in California. And yeah, mostly it's the travel bug for me. I'm grateful for all this video technology. So, even it feels so much different than this would have felt 10 years ago if the pandemic had hit then.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, this has been super informative. Very interesting discourse, hopefully intellectual enough for the high bar of Williams College, I'm sure.